So I'm Gil. I'm from the Northern Queensland Primary Health Network. I'm one of the senior primary care engagement officers. We have Deb with us tonight as well, who's one of our new engagement officers as well. How long have you been with us, Deb?
6 weeks.
Oh, 6 weeks. How long already? Oh, my lordy. So yes, we're baptism of fire for Deb tonight, and we've got our lovely Kayla who helps us organise all these events, because without her, this would not be happening. Not if I had to organise it, because I'm not nearly as good at her as she is at doing this stuff. So this session has actually come about as part of our First Nations continuous quality improvement that we've been running since September last year. We discovered when we were looking at our health needs assessment for the whole of our region, which is south of Serena all the way up into the Cape and Torres, that only 13% of people who identify as Aboriginal Torres Strait Islanders had been billed for a 715 health assessment. And that's really not good enough. So out of 80,000 identified, only about 11,000 had been done. So yeah, that was pretty low. So that became our focus. So we've done a lot of work around patient health literacy, upskilling mainstream general practices to deliver care in a culturally safe way and environment. We've done chronic disease management, and now we're moving on to our mental health, social wellbeing situation, which is where we've got the lovely leader. So I'll just tell you a little bit about her, even though I know she's quite well known. So she's a counselling psychologist in her own private practice and a research fellow at Griffith University. She's worked in research in many therapeutic and clinical settings, including private practice and government-funded services. Leda has worked predominantly with First Australian clients, families and communities, and other people who find it difficult to engage with clinically based psychology services. Leda has worked in multidisciplinary teams, I can never get my tongue around that, sorry, and with other agencies to formulate comprehensive treatment and care plans for clients. Leda completed her PhD in 2020 with instruction from Mackay's Indigenous community on preventing First Australians' death by suicide. So please welcome Leda to give us our talk and education tonight. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thanks everyone for coming. Is it just the arrows?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Is there anyone online?
Yes.
Okay. Are they from Townsville?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Thanks everyone for coming. I really appreciate seeing you and your good-looking faces. I want to start by acknowledging the Yuwa Yuvira and the Wudi people. I do this because I have a deep connection here to Mackay. I fell in love with my nephews here. They were both born here. I have good friends here, and as an intern, I started my psychology degree here in Mackay. So they're deep roots. My parents live in Serena, and I just think this country is beautiful. Manhattan is beautiful, Youngalla is beautiful, the harbour is beautiful. It's a beautiful country, and the traditional custodians have been looking after this country for thousands of years, and that's worth acknowledging. So in order to start, I acknowledge the traditional custodians and thank them for what they've done for this country, this beautiful sea and land country. And I also pay my respects to the elders who have gone before us and those who are with us today. If it wasn't for those elders who had gone before us, I certainly wouldn't be standing here in front of you, because they have fought many fights for mob and the benefits that we're experiencing today. So That's why I do that. I also want to acknowledge the traditional custodians up in town, so we've got an online participant from up there. Wulgurugapa, Bindal, Bugabadhan, and Naiwai people. Naiwaiga, I beg your pardon, Naiwaiga people. The traditional custodians up in Townsville. I also do this because I have a connection to Townsville through my grandmother. So have you heard of standpoint theory? Standpoint theory is really about a view or an attitude towards a particular issue from a person's own perspective. That's called standpoint, and how the day-to-day experience influences that person's opinion. So it's important for me, as part of my standpoint, to share with you a bit about me so you understand where I'm coming from, my history, and what has helped shape my views and opinions, because I'll be sharing a lot of those with you here tonight. And I'm going to start with family. I'll put this photo up here. Oh, sorry. Some of you will recognise some of these faces. That lady on the far left is my grandmother. That's my father's mother. She's a member of the stolen generation. She was taken from Camberwell and she was sent to the orphanage in Townsville when she was a child. I would love to be able to tell you who our people are, but I can't do that for that reason. We don't know. So she was taken from Camberwell, that's as far as we know, and we know that her mother's name was Bella. She was taken under the Industrial School and Reformatories Act back then. So under that act, an Aboriginal child, well, a child to an Aboriginal woman, was deemed neglected, and as a result they were taken from their family, hence the stolen generation. So my grandmother was a member of the stolen generation. So this is my family. Mum's here. Over here, that's mum. Mum's the lady in the white dress down the front here. My father, he only wears a paper crown at Christmas time. Dad, a lot of you will know Dad. So Mum and Dad have been married for 52 years this year.
3 years next week. 53.
53 years next week. That's amazing. Congratulations, Mum. So it's Mum and Dad. The lady in the white shirt only wears antlers at Christmas time. That's my mother's sister, Annie Ray. Annie Ray is a nurse. She works up at Atherton. I'm going up to Cairns in a couple of weeks, so I'm expecting her to be there. The lady in the black behind her is her daughter, my cousin Rebecca. My sister there is up the back in the blue. She works here in Mackay at Marabista. Annie Ray with the antlers. Her husband is in the Hawaiian shirt. That's Uncle Com. He's an Irishman. My sister's partner is wearing the Roosters jersey. That's Dave. He works for my 105 radio station. I did an interview with him this morning to talk about this workshop. My beautiful nephews there are just behind Mum. That's Gabriel, and Deacon's the younger one, pulling a funny face. They go to Mackay Christian College, and that's me in the African dress. I wanted to just show you this picture of family because we love each other. Sure, we have our issues, every family does, but these people have influenced me in many different ways. So I just wanted to share that with you. And this is me with my PhD. So I did my PhD, and I shared the long title with you. First Australian Holistic Health development of a multidimensional model of suicidal ideation and suicide-related behaviour. So as Gil mentioned in the introduction, I did my PhD under the instruction of the Indigenous community here in Mackay. I had a critical reference group that I worked with on my PhD, and the most meaningful contribution from my PhD is a model that explains the journey that the participants in the study had experienced on the road to suicidal ideation or suicide-related behaviour, which you could term life-threatening behaviour. And then there was an experience of empowerment for some people. So if you could imagine two cycles, they coexist, but they're mutually exclusive. And the first cycle where people start off is a cycle of powerlessness, and the other cycle is a cycle of empowerment. So the participants had been caught in or live in their lives with experiences of powerlessness that sometimes generate a force that has them experience just one episode of distress that acts like it's the straw that breaks the camel's back. And there's a surge of negative energy that happens there. And from there, they go through a few other steps to get to an experience of suicidal ideation and life-threatening behaviour. And some of the participants went from there to experiences of empowerment. And they could have taken any form, really. It was all about the individual and what empowered them. But some of the most powerful experiences were spiritual experiences and also social experiences. They were experiences of empowerment that had people understand that there was more to life than what they were seeing and experiencing at that time. And the whole idea behind the model is to spend as much time in experiences of empowerment that you can, because those experiences counteract the experiences of powerlessness. So I haven't actually published from my PhD yet. I plan to do it. I find publishing a bit of an arduous task, but if I'm more than happy to send you a copy of the PhD. It's a long read, but I can recommend some sections for you to concentrate if you're interested in reading about that. So that's me with a very happy me with the finished PhD. Oh, I need to mention that I'm not Torres Strait Islander, and I won't be talking about Torres Strait Islander culture tonight. That would be exceptionally inappropriate of me. And Torres Strait Islanders are very different and unique to Aboriginal culture and Aboriginal people. So it's an important point for me to mention. I'm working 2 jobs at the moment. Like Gil said, I'm at Griffith University as a research fellow. So the position of research fellow is what people do when they've done a PhD and they want to do some more research. They become a research fellow. And then I've got my own private practice. So I just want to elaborate on a point that Gil mentioned in my introduction is the private practice that I work in is at a church. And one of the points in the intro that I want to elaborate on is providing mental health care services to people who wouldn't normally access mental health care services. So because I'm in a church, I actually have access to people who come for food parcels. There are different outreach services that the church has. Food parcels is one of them. And sometimes those people express a desire to see a psychologist or what have you. And I just happen to be there on a Thursday. And that's when we have community lunches as well. So I work in my private practice 1 or 2 days a week, and I'm there as part of the community lunches serving food. And I find that that's a very easy way for me to meet people, have people see me and talk with me. And then it's a soft entry point to working with me as a psychologist. And I'd hazard a guess that they haven't really met a psychologist in that kind of format before. So for me, it's easy, and I have a experience when I left school in hospitality, so I quite enjoy that. And I'm available to work with them. And of course, I mostly roll the bill because these people can't afford to see a psychologist. So that's just one of the points I wanted to mention. And I'm a member of the Australian Indigenous Psychologists Association. So I'm currently a co-vice chair of the organisation, and we're all volunteers for that. We don't get government funding yet. I just put this map up because I just wanted to give you an idea about where I've worked. So the red dots are where I've worked before, and the purple dots are where I've been for research. So I've worked on the Gold Coast in Brisbane, of course, here in Mackay. I have done some research work out at Roma and some at Mount Isa as well. That dot up the top, that's for Ramangini and Milingimbi Island. I was so blessed to have the opportunity to go and visit a company called Mackay. And Mackay make the most amazing furniture on Milingimbi Island. So whenever you want in the break or even now, just jump on the internet and have a look up Mackay, Manapan. You will be blown away with the furniture that they make there. True artisans, so amazing. Then I've also worked at Port Hedland and Derby, and what's the other one? Derby Broome, and I've spent time in Broome doing research as well. One of the points that I really want to make here is the diversity amongst mob. So if you imagine the different geographical landscapes here and the diversity, and then that gives you an idea of how diverse our mob are as well, because I mean, it's country, it's land country and sea country. So I don't actually talk for, and this is part of Standpoint, I don't actually talk for all of our mob. This is me, my experiences from the people that I've spoken to and the work experiences that I've had. I just want to highlight that point as well. There's a lot of diversity amongst our people, and that's one of the big things that I've come to understand over time and with the experiences that I've had. I use the term First Australians. That's just my preference. So I'll be using First Australians mostly. I might use Indigenous to recognise that here in Mackay, there's a really unique profile of the Indigenous community here, when we've got South Sea Islander presence, Torres Strait Islander presence, and Aboriginal presence, and intermarriages, and it's just a really unique cultural profile in this community. So I'll use Indigenous sometimes and First Australian most times. Okay, this is where your handouts start. And these are the learning objectives for tonight. You would have read these in the handout that you saw. Oh, yes, please. Or Stephanie can just print out the handouts if she's close to the printer, or she can just make her own notes. Yep.
I'll drop it in anyway.
Okay.
Hopefully.
So these are the learning objectives. Just have a read of those. I'm going to read a few things from this book tonight. I found it at the Griffith Bookshop, and it's an interesting read. It's a book called Healthcare and Indigenous Australians, Cultural Safety in Practice. It's written by Kerry Taylor and Pauline Thompson-Gearon. Neither of these ladies are Indigenous, and I want to read to you some scenarios that they've written in here that I think are quite effective in the message that it sends. But I want to read to you this excerpt of their preface because they're non-Indigenous authors, and I just want you to hear from them as to why they wrote this textbook. Because, well, here we go. As non-Indigenous authors of this book, we do not present Indigenous knowledge or speak on behalf of Indigenous peoples, other than where we have individually been asked to share certain information to help educate others. It has been suggested that non-Indigenous people have no place even writing a book on Indigenous health. To those people, we respectfully disagree. Indigenous people alone will not improve Indigenous health. It is a shared responsibility, and as part of the dominant cultural groups, this book is our contribution to turning the lens on ourselves through reflection on practice. And I thought that was insightful of them, and I'm thankful that they wrote that in there. I agree with that. What do you think? What did you think when I first said, oh, I'm going to read from this book that's written by non-Indigenous authors? What did you think?
Yeah, I understand what they were saying, and that, so I wanted to hear what they were going to say.
Mm.
Yeah, because being of the white nation, it's very hard how to approach First Nations sometimes in the health industry, and it is something we all have to get in and do together, because that's what we're here for, is each other.
Thanks. Any other thoughts?
Skeptical at first, but I guess that's just a bias that I have to be mindful of, because we always say that it's everybody's business to close the gap and to assist Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in their health journey. So I guess that's something that I should be mindful of, maybe my biases too, because I do agree with what they say.
The immediate questions for me were, in which environment First Nations people did the authors work in, and where did they draw their experiences from, and are they relevant to all First Nations people, so that they know about who wrote the authors themselves? I'm curious to know where they drew their experiences from, so potentially their learning.
Expected that the white content there. I find a lot of black people that haven't been grown up the old ways. They have an opinion, but their insight is not as well versed as what people have been taught through generations of it. So they're getting this glossy image of what it is to be an Aboriginal person out with good education, but we're not coming from grassroots level of 4 or 5 generations of trauma. So those people are the ones that need to be probably heard more than the ones that educate, because they have, that comes for generations.
Mm.
I speak from my generation. So, yeah, I mean, I see this all the time, people talking about something, but they really don't, they're machine, which is no different from the first person to education.
So it's important to have a variety of experiences with a variety of mob.
Yeah, because I've got 10 votes. Change, it's just still the same.
Mm. And the trauma filters through.
Oh.
Mhm.
It seems, this stolen gene seems to be used now as a metaphor for why some people have, claim now, and although I get that and I understand it, I don't think that people really understand what it's like to be one.
Hmm.
And I've spoken to other stolen gene people, and they're offended by that.
Mm.
Because, this now makes it legit. Like, it takes everything, what that actually is. Me as a person who's experienced that all through my life, and that now gets used as an explanation as to why someone can just claim that without actually living it.
So it's important to understand other people's standpoints and have other people understand yours. And we'll delve into that when we talk about cultural humility as well later tonight. Okay. Thank you. So let's get started on the, okay, thank you. Let's get started on the first learning objective here. When it comes to health, the search continues for a definition that's universally agreed upon, and a definition that highlights the complexity of human existence and the diversity of such culturally entrenched concepts like health. Sure, there's a World Health Organization definition and plenty of definitions about that, and plenty of definitions about health, but the search for a definition that fits everyone really does continue. Identifying and accommodating factors that influence someone's health. And when we're talking about holistic health, it encompasses factors like nutrition, culture, interpersonal relationships, spiritual beliefs, and other environmental influences that are of particular significance for First Australians. In adopting a holistic health approach, really, it's the individual that's in the driver's seat. The individual's got the locus of control, and what happens in their life and causality sits with the individual because they're living their life and are in the best position with appropriate support and education to understand what aspects of health and life are influencing and shaping their state of holistic health. They're the ones in the driver's seat in the best position to understand themselves. So in this way, it's argued that the individual is the initiator, the instigator, the recipient of healthcare, and the participant of the experience of holistic health. A holistic health model has the potential to reinstate some authority and control of decisions about health and health outcomes for the individual. Now, there's an issue with this because assuming control initiates a shift in responsibility to the individual, where that individual is seen as having control over their own health, that could be used as an excuse to reduce health services for that person, especially to the impoverished. So those without the skill set to engage in holistic health. I'm interested in knowing how you conceptualise health. How do you work with people in your life as clients, as patients, as friends, as family? How do you conceptualise health?
When we're looking at health and the complete holistic health of the individual and looking at their social and emotional well-being, their lifestyle, where they come from, and a psychosocial biological model of care, or that's how they present holistically.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's very contextual, and it's looking at the individual within their context. And I guess that's the starting point for me if I'm presenting a client for them. Is looking at where they come from, what influences that environment, where they're at currently, and then working with First Nations people where there's trauma, looking at what is acute, chronic, and secondary trauma. So that's a whole lot of subject. So to answer your question, it's looking at the whole, and in terms of where one sits spiritually and culturally, environmentally, and within the family.
Right. Yeah.
Just briefly.
And I've just got a question for you. Given that's how you conceptualise health and your work experience, what is the best way of working for you? Is it working as a sole practitioner, or does that model of health and your way of working transfer to other ways of?
Yeah. So it's about working from the multidisciplinary model in terms of the framework, and not being the expert in somebody else's life, because they are the expert of their lived experiences. So for me, it's working collaboratively and working in that multidisciplinary care with others.
Thank you.
Yama everybody, my name is Catherine McLaren. I'm a Gullah Wiradjuri woman from Redfern. Spent the last 30-something years on Ghana country, the colonising place Adelaide. But was raised here on Niue country and when I was 17. Now back, I can love you in the room, Uncle Phil. So I haven't met before. Hello. My perception is that I'm a tool in their toolbox. If it's an Anugu traditional person in front of me, I tailor my response to their association to their culture and how strong that conception of their culture is. So, for example, if I'm treating somebody who's experiencing white collar psychosis, but they think that they're being sung up spiritual ways for walking on wrong land, then I have to walk in both worlds. So I might be able to convince somebody to take blood pressure medicine only if I acknowledge that they're being punished or sung up because they married into the wrong mob over here. So it's always a bit of a dance, and I'm just a tool in their toolbox.
What's your discipline?
Social work.
Social work, yeah. Thanks for that. based on what you've just said, has me think about one of these scenarios. Okay, I'm going to get my glasses. Okay, this is one of the scenarios from this book. And this relates to a different perspective and a view on health. A young Aboriginal man presented at a remote health centre. A young non-Aboriginal female nursing student, Naomi, attended to him on arrival. The young man whispered to Naomi that he had a sore throat. On further history taking and physical assessment, Naomi found that he had a red and inflamed throat. She then asked the man what he thought had caused the problem. Again, he whispered to her that he had eaten too much kangaroo fat. Naomi immediately wrote the client's explanation in his file notes. It would be fair to say that nurses and medical staff do not often write in explanations that seem at odds with the medical explanation of a problem. The client immediately looked at ease with this nurse and whispered further explanation that eating too much fat was greedy and what had made him sick. This is a common health belief in this region. Naomi asked him what he would like to do to resolve his problem. He said that he would see an Mackay or traditional healer and would not eat too much fat from now on. Naomi then suggested that she might be able to help with medicine and asked him to come back for follow-up if needed. This interaction showed the opportunity afforded in working across cultures. Rather than asking people to choose between the systems, the two systems can work complementarily, offering the client optimal choice in healthcare. Naomi's responses to the client's explanation validated his beliefs and did not privilege her own. More often than not, health professionals dismiss Indigenous explanations because of their supposed lack of scientific credibility. This is understandable. Most people will value their own culture and beliefs above others. It is the extent to which this occurs that can be problematic. If we place our own culture as superior to, rather than as simply different from another, then we engage in ethnocentrism, a destructive attitude that has potential to cause harm. I was just reminded of that based on what you said. Mm-hmm. Mm. Mm. Thank you for that. I read this critical review when I was doing my literature review for the PhD, and if you're interested in Aboriginal holistic health, I highly recommend this reading. It's in the list of references at the back of your handout. It's a critical review written by Mark Locke, and he's a very good writer and it's very insightful, and I'm thankful that he wrote it. So I recommend that reading about holistic health. Journeys of Healing is a painting that I'm going to show. It's in the next slide, and it's a representation of aspects of health that's identified by a cultural perspective, and it provides a framework that is an example of a framework that honours the First Australian individual's experience. So this painting was done by an amazing woman. Her name's Lorraine Barlow, and she's from Yarrabah. And this has been published before. It's in a textbook. And this has influenced me to the point where it's the framework that I use as a practitioner. So I formulate my progress notes for clients, and I think about clients' experiences using this model. It's what I call the SIPES model. The SIPES is the acronym for social, intellectual, physical, emotional, and spiritual well-being. This is just one example, and I'll go through and I'll explain it to you. Up in the top left-hand corner, that is a queen green ant. That represents social well-being. Underneath that is an owl, and that owl represents intellectual well-being. Physical well-being is the tree over on the right here. Emotional well-being is the tears, and spiritual is the stars on the top right. You can see how this painting communicates only Lorraine's complex and intimate understanding of the environment in her country. So I'll take social and I'll give you an example. What do you know about the winged queen green ant? Yeah, I don't know much either. I don't know anything about the winged queen green ant, but what I can extrapolate from this is that they're social creatures, and being the queen, obviously she's central to that social system. Now, I'll go through an example of social well-being and explain how it affects other aspects of well-being. In literature, social connectedness has been highlighted as a really important protective factor in preventing deaths by suicide. I've got a number and have worked with a number of First Australian clients who have dysfunctional relationships with family members. They have few supports, and as children have experienced episodes of abuse that I've had difficulty listening to. So if you were to consider a house where there is domestic violence and alcohol abuse, home's not safe when alcohol's being consumed. So a young person might stay awake at night, be on alert, and then when everyone's finally asleep in the early hours of the morning, they can maybe get some sleep too. It's not difficult to make the link between a scenario like this and a child's intellectual well-being. There's plenty of literature on how trauma affects neural pathways in the brain, limited capacity to engage in intellectual pursuits like school, infrequent school attendance because other concerns take priority, like hunger, which leads to physical well-being. The physicality of the experience of trauma, bruises, broken bones, poor nutrition. Emotional well-being, every day, year after year, engaging the fight, flight, freeze response, anxiety, depression, eating disorders, personality disorders, take your pick. And then spiritual well-being, questioning the meaning of life, not having the experience of being connected to land or your country when you're so preoccupied with keeping safe. As part of the treatment plan for one of my clients who experienced childhood trauma, we drew on her spiritual beliefs of God, and we meditated on Bible verses like Jeremiah 29:11, and that says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future." That fit with her spiritual beliefs. So you could probably see how, and some of you might be thinking about clients that are not Indigenous, and you probably see that there are lots of points that I've made that are very applicable to them too. And that's because what I've spoken about is what it means to be human. It's just that some clients are very complex and don't neatly fit into the westernized medical model. You'll see in this painting that there are some delineations between each of the aspects of well-being, but they're dots, they're not lines. And you'll see the figures connecting them, and the individual is central. The individual person is central. So by its very nature, working holistically is multidimensional, and there can be any number of variations in how holistic well-being is represented, any number of aspects of well-being that you could include in a holistic model. And the holistic context is very organic. It's an organic notion, and it implies that the various dimensions interact as a systemic whole for the person. So, for example, managing a chronic disease might require a treatment plan that includes medical, that includes social, family, educational, physical and emotional interventions. And perhaps something like a Venn diagram might help some of you conceptualize a holistic model of well-being. And of course, in Venn diagrams, they're all overlapping, and you will have sections where 2 overlap, where 3 overlap, where they all overlap in the middle. And there will be aspects of people's lives that fit into each of these sections. So that might help you think about holism and working with the whole person. Any thoughts about that?
I think it goes back to what you said before, which every individual has their own journey. And so every individual has their own journey and their own story, and every aspect of their life can be impacted by one action or one situation.
I might just do a quick exercise to solidify this idea of holism. Got this handout here, which you may find helpful and want to use in the future. So I've just taken each of the sections on the painting with a brief explanation of each there. So I'll give that to you and we'll just apply it to this personal story here. Thank you very much. I'm going to start reading the personal story so you get an idea. People prefer to hear and others prefer to read. So I'm just going to read it for those of you who prefer to listen. And the exercise will be about getting an understanding of aspects of David's life and, oh, thank you, aspects of David's life and where they fit into the model of holism. If the Venn diagram works for you, then you could draw it on the back of that handout because the back is blank. So if you want to draw in the Venn diagram, that might give you a little more freedom depending on where your mind's at. My name is David. My Aboriginal name is Tanda, which is my language, which means male red kangaroo. And I'm a Kaurna person from the Adelaide Plains region. Ghana. I'm in my mid-50s, married to a woman of English origin who is younger than me. And we have 2 primary school age children. My Aboriginal culture and history is not only who I am, but encompasses my entire being. I have a strong attachment to the land and my people's beliefs. However, growing up as a child, I was unaware of my heritage and did not find out until after the referendum and changes to social structure and law. Our ancestry had been hidden for 3 generations after my paternal great-grandmother had been forced, under South Australian law, to renounce her Aboriginality and that of her children and grandchildren in order to keep her family home after the death of her non-Indigenous husband. My mother was also stolen generation, but this I did not know until I was in my early 40s. Growing up, my grandfather would often take me on fishing, hunting, and camping trips and tell me stories that never made any sense until I discovered who I was. I was a poor student at school, but as an adult, my interest turned more and more to the health of my people. And I found I had an aptitude for university study in the health field. I now have 2 degrees and a postgraduate degree in mental health. Mental health is a major health issue for Aboriginal people, and I've spent the last 2 years setting up an Aboriginal specific mental health clinic in Adelaide. This has seen me working long hours with a poor diet, lack of family time, and bad sleeping habits. My health appeared to suffer, but nothing a holiday wouldn't fix. It was while on holidays in January 2009 that I became unwell and was admitted to hospital. The diagnosis was disastrous. I had colon cancer. Urgent surgery was performed and chemotherapy started. As an Aboriginal man and a professional trained in mental health, I believed that I had a fantastic understanding of how health issues impacted on the psychological well-being of Aboriginal people. I forgot to take my own traditional beliefs into account. In my language, there is no word for cancer. It just means death and is not spoken about. As the specialist gave me the diagnosis, my mind went into overload and told me I was going to die. Now that I would die in 2 weeks, not that I would die in 2 weeks or 6 months or 2 years, but that I was dead now. This feeling stayed with me for about a month until my family and friends slowly brought me back to reality. What is extremely interesting was that during this period, I lost all spiritual contact with my land, my internal spiritual being, and all my training. It was just like being lost, being empty. The depression was enormous. The battle with this disease continues, and the conflicts between my modern scientific training and my traditional beliefs are ever present. But now there are two significant differences. Firstly, I no longer see my cancer as an absolute death sentence, and I've started to combine my professional skills with my traditional beliefs to win this fight. Secondly, and possibly also a major factor in my own recovery, is that this battle with my own physical and psychological health issues has given me a greater insight into the world many of my people live on a daily basis. 60% of Aboriginal people Australia-wide never complete chemotherapy treatment, and the causation for this is not well documented. As I have come close to withdrawing from treatment on 4 occasions, once due to chemicals that didn't agree with me, and on 3 other occasions because of traditional and emotional conflicts, I'm now keeping a journal and working closely with my oncology team to eventually look at ways to improve engagement for Aboriginal patients. So what I'm going to do is give you 5 minutes to spend some time going through that personal story and just highlighting or making notes of what fits in which aspect of that SIPES model. You can just write that on the personal story. Those handouts are yours, and I won't be collecting them afterward, so feel free to do with them what you will. But the exercise here is to get an idea of David's experience and what goes in which aspect of well-being. You might want to take your own framework and apply that to David's experiences. I'm going to give you some time to do that now, and then we'll come back and have a yarn about it. Those of you who are interested in sharing your thoughts about this exercise.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to be very up and down the road. It will be lots and lots of stuff. I'm going to be able to stay back. I'm reading some of the all of those right here, my darling. Be my first one for you. If you
No. I'm just asking.
Thank you.
I don't think you. That's right. Thank you very much. Yum. Yeah.
But when it was good, yes, I did think
Very tolerant. Very tolerant. Needs to be. I think.
That was dessert. What do you think of dessert? I'd be interested to know what you thought about that exercise and David's story. Tell me what you think.
David's story in this context, so I have to be explain that I am non-Indigenous, but have the privilege of working with First Nations people. So looking at David's story, and for me it was his lost identity, that identity that wasn't present, but is very innate. So all of the social, physical, intellectual paradigms there have shaped and formed his identity, which is not his First Nations, but it's innate in him. So in the spiritual context, that spiritual, perhaps emotional, is never present. And when we're looking at that that model, while we might look at it holistically, we need to work on them individually where there is mental health, for example, in order to be able to deconstruct and be able to see how each fits with the other, if that makes sense.
It does.
What was good was that connection with his culture and the richness of that, and being able to identify who he is as an Aboriginal person, and to be able to lean and connect with his spirituality, this country where healing begins.
Indeed.
So looking at a medical model that versus a spiritual or a holistic model, and sometimes those things need to play across each other in order to understand the fuller human being.
Absolutely. You can sense the yearning in his story as well, and what he's saying.
Just as a point there, you've got 5 circles. From David's story, I looked at it, was, yes, we understand he's got taken away at a time of his life that affected him. But at the end of the day, when he grew to be a man, you can put this social part, intellectual part, and the spiritual part. Which part of that conversation did he reach out for spirituality? When was it physical? So what was the greatest part of his journey at the start? Because I know a lot of people would come to a certain part of their life and they think, all right, I'm going to be an Aboriginal today. And I'm thinking to myself, well, you weren't an Aboriginal before, you was an intellectual, you was this, you was that. So when you look at those 5 circles, we could, I suppose, if we're going to define something, we need to know what was the most important part of the journey, not the end part. The important part of that journey was what made you when you got to at the end. And that's in a sense, that's an advance of how the group was done. Because if I look at young men coming through now, and they've never had that journey, they don't have no idea, but they read that part that they've identified as Aboriginal people. And I'm like, so how did you get this part to be an Aboriginal person? I thought, it's confusing for me because we always knew that part, but now we've got people that you can't say this and you can't say that because they were now they want to be an Aboriginal person. I find that with David's story, if you was always, we probably wouldn't have got to that part if you knew the old ways. He's taking Western methodology to get to that part. And with the people that understand the old ways, he probably wouldn't have got there. He wouldn't have, that story wouldn't have been there.
Yes.
With respect. He was taking with old ways.
And you can tell in his story the influence of his education, his tertiary education, where he talks about mental health and what have you. And he talks about his study. And you can kind of see how that's influenced the way he sees things. And then this struggle that he's talking about.
Or another mental health is a world student. Their language or their culture. So it's being described as it's a right, that's just an 8-year-old. Even a lot of Aussie it's so westernised, and we see overrepresentation of Aboriginal people in the mental health system itself. Because it's from the back fives, because they supposedly demonstrate We know that Aboriginal people are overdiagnosed simply because we still have that spiritual perspective.
Mm.
Talk to our old people, you talk. That's been.
Would you be willing to share what your professional practice framework is? How do you work with clients? Would you be willing to share that or not? That's okay. No, okay. Let me read another scenario. I like this one. You'll like this one too. It includes nunkeries. Oh man, this thing. Okay. I like this one. This is Kerry Taylor, so it's the first author talking about her experience. I'd not been long in the remote Aboriginal community, having left a life in Sydney that was as far removed from this present circumstance as you could get. I was standing in the clinic waiting for a friend who was working as a remote area nurse. I was there to start a health education program with the local women. We were the only non-Aboriginal people in the room. I was suddenly aware of the language being spoken around me and what it felt like to be out of my comfort zone. I didn't know what was being said. I didn't know the conventions for interacting. All the non-verbal cues were quite different from what I was used to. People didn't look at one another when they talked. I must have been holding my side as I had some pain from a kidney infection that had flared up. An Aboriginal woman came up to me and stared at me really hard. She walked around me like she was checking me out. I felt a little uncomfortable. You got pain? She stated. Oh, yes, I have. I've got an infection in my kidneys with no doubt about my diagnosis. I can help you. I'm a nunkery. You know me, a witch doctor. I was suddenly aware of all the eyes in the room now looking at me. A witch doctor? Really? I was searching my friend's face for some idea of how to respond. Nunkery are the traditional healers, my friend explained. Alice is supposed to be really good. She might be able to help you. My Western medically orientated mind was saying doubtfully, yeah, sure she can. But I had a sense that this woman was serious and I thought, why not? Alice moved her hands all over me, stopping each time at the side of my pain and making out as if she was pulling something out from my body. She then walked to the door and flicked the invisible substance outside. She squeezed and pulled and manipulated my side, repeating the process for a number of times, and then finally stood back and said, that pain's gone now. You had that green stone and I pulled it out. You'll be all right now. People were having a bit of a giggle at the new white fella, I thought. This is a bit of an initiation or something. Then I straightened up and realised, to my utter amazement, that for whatever reason, the pain had gone. My head went riot trying to rationalise it. I looked back at my friend who was just finishing her consultation, telling the client, now take all of these tablets right to the end, even when you feel better. You need to keep taking them and all that will clear your chest up again. Was that client doing the same thing I'd done? Just being polite to this person who I didn't really believe? Nodding, but all the while thinking, this isn't right. I know what's wrong with me and that's not going to fix it. But then it worked. So I was really stuck, and maybe the clients were as well. It worked at some level, but did we both believe? This episode was a turning point for my practice. It wasn't that I was unaware of different worldviews. It was really that I wasn't aware of how entrenched in my own I was. I was here to tell these people about health and healthcare and the medical model, because after all, that really is the best form of healthcare, isn't it? I'd accepted the opinions of the nurses and medical staff when they told me they Aboriginal people have really poor compliance. You have to keep telling them these things over and over. All they need is more education. And yet here, in this one episode, I was asked to do what Aboriginal people are asked to do every day. Trust in something that is at odds with your own health belief system. Ever since that day, I've made a conscious effort to ensure that I don't buy into the view that by continuing to hound someone with health messages, they will accept my superior knowledge and beliefs. Any thoughts about that or the exercise we've done?
Think, we Aboriginal people have lived on this continent for 60,000 years without having a very comprehensive knowledge about what works for us and what doesn't work for us. With our bush medicines and traditional healers, whilst they may practice what some people might believe is black magic or whatever term you want to put on it. Just the ability to understand the situation and talk it through with people and understand that we as human beings, we have a whole lot more power over our being than we acknowledge. And it can be physical, it can be spiritual, it can be emotional. So I think that's the point, is that Aboriginal people, it's part of our DNA, part of our being, that we should embrace our cultural medicine and bush medicines more so than just accepting white man's medicines and all the drugs that they try to pump into us. Ricky and I, we went to this talk last night, facilitated by suicide prevention, and the speaker was talking about there's so many drugs that are prescribed each year to all of us Aussies, and it's just crazy, and it's all fueled by the drug companies. They're making lots of money out of a lot of these prescriptions that the doctors prescribe to us, and we should be getting back to our own traditional ways. Gumby, for instance, it's my family's medicine, and whenever we're feeling down, we brew up a batch of gumby, and I have that on a regular basis, and it helps boost our immune system. That's our belief anyway, and helps us feel better. So I think there's a real message there about, and if you go back to those communities where they're really strongly connected to their culture, that's the other thing, is that people in the urban cities now, they've lost that connection to their culture and all of their bush medicines, and so we need to get back to those communities where they're still strongly connected and embrace that cultural knowledge. So that's my take on it anyway.
Thank you, Uncle. Oh, yes. Yay.
That's why in some communities, it's still pretty strong, especially in, rural Guinea, alcohol on, tea on, concrete. Because you know what those plants are, you know what they do.
Mm.
You know the women's plants and the men's plants, and you get taught that. A lot, especially in remote communities too. I don't know if you found this leader or not, but the old people, they hate going to Darwin. And family, like we're in the sorry business because they die, they don't come back.
Hmm.
And it's another reason why the, remote mob don't like white man's medicine, because it kills us and it stops our bodies from being open and fluid, sorry. You know, like you can't, it's very difficult to start something when it's lost or to revisit it if you don't know what the structures are. You know what I mean?
So when you say it stops fluidity, what do you mean?
Well, for instance, if client has temazepam or quetiapine,
Mm-hmm.
like what that fellow was saying last night, in between each brain cell, you've got serotonin.
Mm-hmm.
The drugs actually block that from connecting, which is a natural innate part of humans, right? Well, these pepper medications, they actually stop it. So that's not healing.
They interrupt natural processes. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, and they do. They don't. And I think that's why a lot of people become quite numb. And I think from just from what my mum has told me, the old people don't like going to hospital. They would rather get taken out of the hospital, and family would drive hundreds of kilometres to go and see a nunnery before they go to Darwin. Because that's the big hospital. That's where all the countrymen go if they're really sick. They don't allow us to heal our own people because of their Hippocratic oaths or whatever. So they're not allowing us to do that, to embrace that. And that, I think, is part of the continuing colonisation of us, Mom. Because, I've seen family that can do some pretty powerful things. And you can't explain that because people have say, yeah, bullshit, that doesn't happen, but it does. Absolutely. I've seen a lot of things that you can't talk about. And so to share, you got to be careful about what you share. And that's where the spiritual side of things, what I find really difficult here is that it seems to me that Aboriginal culture is a pageantry. Right? Just pick bits and pieces out what you want and leave the rest. You can't do that. If you think that that's possible, then you are going against the old people, the old spirits, and this is what we were taught as kids growing up. Even though I was taken from my birth mother and my family, I was raised by black. And we would go to Sherbrooke a lot. And back in those days, we used to have what we call thunderboxes. And they were about, 20 yards from the back of the back door. So if ever us kids wanted to go toilet, we'd have to go as a big group.
Hmm.
Or, you know, you'd end up wetting your pants or something, but there was no way we was going to go out to the Thunderbolts because we knew, you know, Mackay or Featherfoot, they're waiting for you. Because them old people used to say that he loves naughty kids.
The behaviour management strategy.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so, you know, we learned to be that spiritual side of us. You know, it's you know, it's innate, I guess.
So taking what you've said, in this, the whole model is fixed within the context of culture, because that's the individual and it's within the broader context of culture. Yeah. Whereas there would be others who would have one element there of culture, another circle in the Venn diagram. And maybe even country as another circle. And it really all depends on the practitioner and the individual and how they conceptualise health.
And then again, there's a different level. You may experience this too or recognise that when you're working with traditional mob, there is another layer of cultural knowledge that you have to have. This comes, it's not kinship. Kinship has been bastardised. We've got skin systems. They are extremely important in traditional communities because that's how you relate to others. There's boys and cousins, and that is a real thing. Because, you know, there's many reasons, but the important reason is to stop interbreeding. And we did that for a reason. That's why, you know, black blood is pure because of the system that we had. And it's not like, you know, brothers or sister. You know, I've got grandmothers who were toddlers. There's a form of relationship that transcends the structure of what a family is. And, you know, there's totems, you know, you've got to know each other's totem and what that represents and what that means and how that relates to that young person. It's not, you know, like, this is why, like I heard what that woman said in that book there, you know, like, you know, what would people think of two white women talking about operating or practicing culturally? No, you can't. You are not.
Not your place.
It's not your place.
Yeah.
And you need, you know, people need to understand that. The only people that can really give you permission in that sense is an initiated culture boss and an initiated forewoman, senior forewoman. If you don't have those, and I don't care if you're married to one or you're going out with one or whatever, that does not make you Aboriginal and you do not have a right to practice any form of culture. That's it. And it's disrespectful, offensive, and it's just ethically and morally wrong.
Cultural knowledge holders are cultural knowledge holders for a reason.
Exactly. So, like, even though I can see where they're coming from, those two women there, but where does that end, right? When do they stop crossing that boundary?
One of the things that really struck me about the other scenario that I read was the availability of choice. I think that is the most important thing, is to give clients choice, give patients choice. You can have traditional healing and Western healing and have people choose. They don't have to be mutually exclusive. They can be complementary, but I think choice is the most important thing
100%.
for patients and clients.
And also too, you know, countrymen don't have to go and see a blood practitioner.
Yep, choice.
We gotta,
It's about choice.
we gotta have that ability to do that choice too.
Mm,
Because when you go into a lot of these organisations, I told them to pay for their choice. I went to certain medical practices, things that happened to me. They had no choice, they just put out the safety up.
mm,
And I thought myself, that's the way you do it, that's the way you do it. So I thought, I accepted that in my mind. It wasn't normal. I accepted it.
mm.
But now, for me to walk into a surgery as a doctor, I'm comfortable in the last 40 years. I've been busted. So I've done it right and there's nobody. This is my choice.
Yes.
When you got to the stage where I'm saying, you can either give me what I need, or
Mm.
walk out the door, but I don't need it.
Mm.
I don't need you.
Yes.
But our young people now, and we respect those cultural. Our young people go into these organisations and they get a bit of nurturing, mentoring, really on the but they really don't know their own identity. And they want to question you on what your identity is. And I'm like, I just scenario 20 years ago, picture of another walked in, and the camera asked if it was a doctor. They also said, African health service. This young one said to me, have you whatever for that? And I just had to look at it and I'm like, I'm of such and such clan group, this such and this like this is not my spin. I said, now little one, you tell me how you did it. Like, if you can't answer that, you need to go back to your elders because you need to understand what you're talking about. You never talk about that. There's a person that can know it.
Mm.
And she said, try to be respectful. I said, sorry.
Mm. Mm.
And just,
Never come back.
that's where there's a massive difference between, lost my train of thought.
But we might, if it's okay, we might go up the back here.
Right.
I don't think Stephanie can hear if you don't use the microphone. Stephanie online.
I'll start thinking another one.
And then,
I do understand if everyone is.
Thank you.
You know, coming through with, you know, mixed blood, my father's white is going on. I didn't go in South Zealand. You know, we're all different and we all have different values. I find working in the hospital, especially in the emergency department, that delicate balance between the, the whole holistic care and the traditional ways and the medical.
Mm.
And it is about choice, like you said. But when you've got a young mum comes in, she's got sort of has the blood's taken. Discharges against medical. She's got a young girl. And then that decision, that choice of not wanting to come back to the hospital, she has a life threatening.
Mm.
And that delicate balance of the other traditional methods going to save his mum. Or this you need medical. That's where, becomes tricky. Negotiating if mum will come in and get the treatment needed for a while. Every conversation, stronghold, because, it's important to speak up. This is also around the freedom of the younger generation to have that choice.
Yeah.
Strongholds, but not always were. Some of that elders are always like that. It wasn't always good. It wasn't always good. I think they all got the country, but they weren't always making good choices. There was abuse up there. It wasn't always one of those that to look up to.
Mm.
You can't do any better while you're not Indigenous.
Mm.
So a lot of the young children are.
Mm.
So there's a lot of the three young children.
Mm. And I can't help but wonder how meaningful it would have been for you working in a hospital to be able to provide a range of alternative treatments for a patient. Mm. Mm. So yeah, it's about choice, but it's also about availability of choice. Mm.
Because when you're dealing with self-harms, they're the, you know, they're the violence, they're the ones that, no matter what, they have the power.
Mm.
Yeah, I think the other part is the effect of the hospital system either. My grandfather, when I was like that, really. Sets off, you know, but my grandfather, I can have a slide from Mackay. We used to sit there and listen to stories of that hospital there, when the old men came in, they used to knock them on the head. Yeah, all the black people got knocked on the head down the river. Well, we got taught that story. And I used to listen to talk to the old people around, and they used to tell me stories. There's a deep distrust of the hospital as a system.
Mm.
Even years later on, my grandfather, he passed away 2012. And I took him into, they took him to have an operation at the base hospital. He was right at the Mackay hospital. As soon as they took him to that base hospital, he wasn't the man I knew. He started to get very shaky.
Mm.
So that's why I jumped in the ambulance with him to come with him to keep his strength. I couldn't understand it, but he was that frightened of that hospital. And there's a lot of us out there that still got the thinking in our head that when we go to that hospital, that environment was a threat to us.
Mm.
It could be not that hospital in Northampton or something, but the local community feels that threat.
Mm.
So
There's a history there.
you've got to get past that part. And, you know, with respect to the guy told the system, they don't know that stuff because of half the black people don't know that stuff.
Mm.
So that's the other part. You've got to get past the emotional part and the intellectual.
Mm.
Because
Yep.
it means nothing if you can't pick a person that's staying in the hospital.
Mm.
It's just a fear. It's a fear amongst us, but they're not going to get good.
And getting that information from them
Yeah.
to have an understanding of where they're at, because like I said before, they're in the driver's seat of their holistic health.
Yeah,
So it work.
if you don't feel that, they're not going to come.
Yeah. Yeah. Johnny.
I was just going to talk more, I guess, from a Torres Strait Islander perspective as well. It reminds me of the conversation I was having with my grandfather and my auntie on the weekend.
Mm-hmm.
And we were talking about the healing properties of traditional medicine and of dugong oil, because my grandfather was telling me about how he'd go out and he would be the one who would catch the dugong and get the oil and provide it to the community. And it would assist in eradicating like tuberculosis and things like that. But then there was a comment that my auntie made that, yeah, it was really good for that, but it wasn't good for diabetes. So I think it's also finding that balance too, because we are partaking in a lot of the Western properties as well.
Mm.
And that's affected part of our holistic being as well. And it's about finding that balance and having that education as well that, okay, that if you're going to partake of this traditional medication, making sure that those other properties are being thought of as well.
Incorporated into the treatment plan. Agreed.
Well, I just want to bring up just something what Sean said about beliefs from the spiritual world. I mean, my family also Australian South Sea Islander and Torres Strait Islander. But in my role, I look after chronic disease patients in a rural area, and some of the Torres Strait Islander families have strong spiritual beliefs, and a lot do practice fasting. So I'm working in a westernized
environment where I'm governed by, as a nurse, I have to, go by my registration. But also going into working in my own community has been very much an eye opener. Seeing different community members, how they live in their community, and we have to respect that. But I understand enough spiritual person myself, but it's like also having to have that balance, like, okay, like I understand what you're telling me, you're fasting, you haven't taken any of your medications, but also just if you're starting to feel unwell, don't forget you can ring 000, or is there someone home with you? Just, as a nurse, we're forever putting safety plans around people just as a precaution, but as also understanding, acknowledging the spiritual world of why people practice their, with the fasting beliefs. Yeah.
Thank you for that. So I've shared with you my professional practice framework, and I'll just give you one more chance to share yours if you're willing to share your professional practice framework. And it's okay if you don't.
I would describe mine as eclectic. Cultural, Western medicine, holistically eclectic. That's
Just sort of the conversation that I am very fortunate to participate in is about living in duality and living with dual cultures, or even maybe three. And there's some really wonderful words being spoken around the room, one of them being availability, which you mentioned, and about choice, freedom of choice, and having informed choices. So if somebody presents and they are of an Aboriginal dad, but say for example, a German mum, but raised by the mum, and there is no connection to their Aboriginal identity, but it's innate in them. It's about having those conversations and being able to say, well, these are your choices. And so, for example, for myself at 67 years of age, I'm not medicated, but I'll go to a GP if I feel that something a bit amiss. And so it's about having an informed consent and a freedom of choice, and taking what is available in this particular community, especially. And so again, living with duality and knowing what your options are, and being very informed in terms of how much you want to know, where you can gain that information. So I take Gumby when I need it. I might sometimes resort to Panadol if I need that as well, but it's about having informed choices and knowing where you sit in each of those, because biologically we're made up of different genetics. So, for First Nations people, being healed in their own environment is really critical to how they heal, and where others may be different, depending on their biological makeup.
Thank you.
That makes sense.
Absolutely, it does. Thank you. Okay, let's move on to the next one. Next, a learning objective. Identify ways of supporting First Nations Australians or First Australians with mental health issues, that is social and emotional wellbeing. So let's just briefly talk about mental health issues and social and emotional wellbeing difference. So you'll know that I'm assuming you'll know that social and emotional wellbeing is used by many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to describe the social, the emotional, the spiritual, and the cultural well-being of a person. And I've heard people recently actually say the acronym as SOUP, which I'm slowly getting used to. I've always just said the letters, but some people are saying SOUP. But it recognises the connection to land and sea and culture and spirituality and family and community in a way that mental health doesn't. important to people and it impacts their well-being. So SEWB recognises that a person's well-being is influenced by those other factors. The mental health is a term that's been used to describe how people think and feel and how they cope with and take part in everyday life. It's a little more restricted to the other factors that are encompassed within the term social emotional wellbeing. Many people observe mental health and mental illness as medical terms that focus too much on problems and they don't properly describe all the factors that make up and influence well-being. Because of this, a lot of people prefer the term social emotional wellbeing as it fits well within a holistic view of health. And the holistic model is more collective and it has connections that aren't evident in the mainstream view of health. Social emotional wellbeing is more more holistic, more capable of encompassing those other factors that I was talking about, as opposed to mental health, which is quite restricted. Do you understand what I mean? Yeah. So that's the difference between the two. Social and emotional well-being, I mean, you can think of it as health as holistic. You can think of it as encompassing the right to self-determination, the need for cultural understanding. Social emotional well-being embraces the impact of history and trauma and loss. It recognises human rights, the impact of racism and stigma, because that's social. It recognises the centrality of kinships, as you were talking before, that's social. Recognition of cultural diversity, and also it incorporates strengths. Culture and self-determination can be really powerful protective factors in providing buffers to psychological distress. And factors that have been identified as enhancing social and emotional wellbeing include maintaining a connection to country and spirituality and ancestry and kinship networks, as well as strong community governance and cultural continuity. You can see how more applicable, if you like, social emotional wellbeing is when it comes to psychological wellbeing. Any thoughts or questions about that difference between social emotional wellbeing and mental health?
I guess there's a connotation that you want.
Yeah.
Mental health.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's exactly what I was thinking. That I've worked a long time. I had, retired, but I had worked in the health system for a very long time. And when anybody says mental health, I see a mental health unit and a ward.
Yep.
And it's a diagnosis and it's a treatment plan that's prescriptive. Their social and emotional well-being is the person, who they are, where they are, how they're connected, and how they're feeling.
That's what it. Mental health is not in the other countries.
Yeah.
You know,
Sickness.
yeah,
And it's displacing.
yeah, absolutely.
Globally.
So the labels we're going to do nothing else about around what is mental health. Is it good mental health or is it poor mental health? That helps define. And so then also there's a difference between what is good mental health and good brain health. That starts a whole other conversation as well, which is individuality, positive diet, lifestyle. If we get very hung up on labels or how we label things, that we really need to break it down to a level. So I can speak to young children or adolescents or adults about mental health, but using different language that applicable to how they understand their mental health, social and emotional well-being. So it's really important for us as practitioners to be able to use a language that is familiar, whether I'm working with a person who identifies as LGBTQIA member of the community. So the mention of working eclectically is about being able to draw on all of those in the space of someone who is individuality or different. It's such a changed conversation now to what it was, say, 20 years ago when I started working in the family sector. And that has changed in terms of how that comes. So it's the moment on our part to continue to grow and develop ourselves as well.
According to what our clients need.
But has it really changed?
Not
So,
greatly. Ideally, you know, the ideal is there, but there is all steps.
You know, I'm just speaking from experience. I've got a 15-year-old son, who is of Aboriginal and white heritage. His family's from Goldgar, my husband's family. He self-harms and all that. So he's 15. Always open with me, and I discovered him self-harming. Got him on medication, it's going really, really well. But he told his mates. And he said to him, you know, like he would pick up on things they were doing and saying, maybe you need to talk to somebody else. Maybe you need to discuss it. So then they started pushing him to the side, so he stopped. Started self-harming, so I had to sit down and explain to him, it doesn't make me less of a person. And that the kids I'd love to get hold of those other kids who made him feel like that, you know. So that's why I'm asking, has it really changed?
I think what changes is we as individuals and how we respond to it, and especially working in the space of trauma and developmentally as well, where someone is at 15 years of age, the environment, and so this connection with you is obviously very strong. But we talk about it.
I'll talk to you about him later.
is your husband still going back to the country?
No, because his grandmother, great-grandmother, was of Aboriginal descent, and family never spoke about her. And it was just me delving into his past that found it all, because he said, I think I do. And I said, why? And he told me, so I could do the research. And yes, that's where they are from, is from the national parks. That's where his grandmother or great-grandmother was. So, yeah, but, yeah, you know, he apparently was seen following me around before I was even pregnant with him. My husband's mother saw me, so we're very close.
It's the one.
So I do believe in the spirituality of things.
Absolutely. I'm working with a young girl who identifies but not raised, and she has a very spiritual connection to a higher omnipresent power, and she looks through it or in Google, and she's connecting herself to Christian beliefs. She wanted to go to church, but her mum isn't of that Christian faith, but that strong spiritual connection, something higher than yourself is present. And she recognizes it as her great grandmother's spirit.
That's interesting.
Very,
Thank you for sharing that. I've a question for you. When it comes to the clients that you work with, is there a difference in whether they, what am I trying to say? Is age a good indicator of whether they align more with the term mental health or social emotional well-being? Or do you just go with the flow when it comes to your clients presenting?
age. When I look at age, am I talking about chronological age or developmental age? And what has influenced that person's life? For young people, it's very different again. And I work very much in my framework with the individual. Because we as individuals now in this century come from so many different influences, especially externally. So if people more around my age and in their 70s, when we talk about mental health or when mental health is discussed, it conjures up that image, as your mum spoke about, mental health warning, is womba, lost the plot completely or whatever. Whereas for younger people, it's a thing to be diagnosed with having PTSD or I'm living with anxiety. So it's almost a rite of passage to have a mental health diagnosis or a form of mental health. So it is very different. And so those conversations are very enriching. For men, so if I'm working with First Nations men, the first thing I will ask is who their connection to country is so that I pay my respects to the elders. The second is how do they feel about working with me as a woman to honour the difference between men's business and women's business. And I've never had a rejection. And the third one is if you're here to do a tick and click list, then there's the door because, there are too many other people who are willing. And I'll be told, oh, you'll probably only engage for about 15 minutes. And 2 hours later, there's this whole story unfolding about lived experience, about that loss of identity and now wanting to find it. And the story of a young man who wanted to know where he belonged. And I said, well, what's your family name? And he said, so and so. And I said, see if you know any other people in that area. And it turned out that he identified as Kalkadoon. So he went on a quest to find out other people who were connected, and his mother encouraged that. He connected with country, and his whole identity was fulfilled. It reduced that need to a loss of power, so domestic violence needs, because he had claimed his identity. Beautiful outcome for him.
That's really encouraging.
Yeah, very encouraging when you're working and coming from a place of non-judgment and just respecting that individual's narrative or dialogue or storyline or truth-telling, whichever way we want to interpret how that person sees himself.
Do you get to spend 2 hours with clients?
Yes, I work so I'm contracted, depending on who, and if it's a first intake, for example, I can do that. Yeah. So usually it's those 3 sessions in a row and then every second week, but I'm also available if something comes up and there's a call that says, I think I've breached. What do you mean you think you've breached? What have you done? And so we go through the whole Domestic Violence Protection Act 2012. And so that education about choices is really critical, whether we're working with First Nations people, but learning to walk in both worlds. And my grandmother always said, know first your enemy, because when you know how they think, then you'll probably end up having compassion.
Speaking of that First Nations Australians, I'm going to put something out on the table. When I was born in the Golden River in Victoria, I was born up before I actually river. I remember when the stolen generation started to come back to their family groups, come to Melbourne. I mean, I was in Sydney when they came back there. I remember the confusion about identity, sexuality, all the things that we knew they'd gone through, because we knew they were Aboriginal people, because they got taken away at that time. They came back to their people. That was in the early days. And now, I'm really confused about this First Nations Australians now, because we grew up this way, and the impacts on us was our scars. We've got people now that want to be scarred, but they don't know the first thing about it. So when do we stop becoming Aboriginal people in a sense and become part of the collective? It was wasn't a unique thing to have all this baggage on us. But now everybody wants to have part of it.
Wants a part of it.
So, you know, when I look at that supporting First Nations Australia, I'm like, I've never said I was an Australian, I was a black fella. I was treated as a black fella, never was accepted as Australian. Now I'm in my 60s, they say, are you an Australian? I refuse. So what I'm asking now is, because young people are saying, we found out my great-granddad was Aboriginal, great-great-granddad was Aboriginal, so I must be an Aboriginal. I'm like, my great-grandfather was from great Scotch person. Does that mean I gotta walk around with a kilt on and pretend to be a Scotch kid? Because I found out I was a Scotsman. No, I've only known one way. So I can't have 10 cents this and 10 cents that. But our society now is causing a problem. All this mental health issue. Because I've seen that mental health issue when I first came back. Now we're creating a new wheel. I'm just wondering where we're going to end up with this.
And I think too, what adds to that is, like, growing up, there was only black fellas. There was no one else, just Aboriginal. Torres Strait mob, Torres Strait. You knew that it's their country, you respect it, you behave with cultural humility. Down here, it was just Aboriginal mob. Now, I think people really struggle with the fact that they don't know really who they are because of changing times, political correctness, you know. For instance, I was at a workshop and the problem or the challenge was to work out how to help this young man who has Aboriginal, Torres Strait and South Sea. Well, how do you help? What cultural aspect do you use? What's the dominant culture? Because everyone has a dominant culture that you live by. You know, like how do we, from a cultural, spiritual perspective, right? How do we work with that person? If you're talking about culture, which one do you take? What's their dominant culture?
Is that a rhetorical question or
No, I'm asking.
you want people to answer?
Yeah, I'm asking. What do you do?
Well, the first thing I thought of when you said that is the client, him in the driver's seat. So it's getting lots of information from him and having him inform his wellbeing goals. And that question is for him to answer and for others who are participating in this treatment plan to contribute to.
But this is where the blurring or the confusion comes in because we didn't have an opportunity to ask that young man for a start. But we had to come up with like a safety plan in terms of suicide prevention.
Oh, so you're coming up with a safety plan, but no access to him to talk about it?
Yep.
That sounds a bit odd to me.
Absolutely.
And
so how do you know, like this is to inform policy and procedures for, you know, the health of this community. How do you do that?
Any other thoughts?
You don't have access to him at all.
No. But this again influences policy and procedure.
Mm.
So was it being presented as a case study?
Yep.
Is that what it was?
You go.
So I'm coming from a human rights perspective.
Mm.
It's valuing the individual's values and beliefs and
Mhm.
what has shaped and created who that person is, and getting back to, you know, these are your choices. It's about validating that person in place, in time and place, because our times have changed so many times, you know, through the impacts of colonization, for example, and the influx of other cultures and other influences. So in working with somebody who identifies across 3 cultures, the question would be, what are your values and beliefs about self, about family, about community, and so on and so forth? So building that strong identity about self is a human rights perspective, the right to have choices to say, this is who I am, this is what I value, this is what I believe, and it could be different from yours. But there's never a projection on what my values and beliefs are, but who that person in time and place and presence is. And that's where we work from that baseline in respecting and honouring and validating that person's lived experiences. And from there, all of those other things, this is the part of me that I understand about being Aboriginal. This is the influence I've had as being raised in Australian South Sea Islander. And this is where I learned to dance as a Torres Strait Islander. So Torres Strait Islander person, because I identify across all 3. It doesn't have to be a broken down of one thing, but a whole collection of richness that makes the person whole.
Then that contributes to them as a person and their experience of the world.
Yeah.
You know,
Thank you.
with that, because this First Nation can again, I make this part. Like it says, I'm born acts, I know what. But now, I look at things and I think to myself, at my age, we're going to have a referendum this year. In my head, I'm thinking to myself, we're having a referendum with what 3.8% of the population in Australia, and the majority is going to make a decision on what I am as a person to feel my well-being. And I'm thinking to myself, again, I'm being told where to sit on the back of the bus, and I won't accept that. But the rest of the nation's going to vote on where I should be sitting at the table. So there's a lot of people out there that actually understand what this means. They're going to struggle. We've got another way of coming because, again, somebody's made a decision for us without us having true say in the matter. And with respect to all these guys that showed up over the roof, there's a great reference right there, our leaders. They got nothing to do with me. They're not my leaders. And I think to myself, I'm struggling at this point now because I'm thinking to myself, after all these years, somebody's still making calls for me as an Aboriginal person. So, just what's that mental health issue?
Just so the holding information that the picture,
Yeah,
what it actually is going to mean.
Yes.
It's like we're providing you this, and it's an opportunity for you, but we're not going to tell you what we're going to do with it.
It's still going. And also too, in respect to that, the Constitution is a white document for the British, right? That we live under that in this country. What happens if this passes? Does that then mean that we're British subjects? And then what then happens to our sovereignty? Because I haven't seen in any of it. Yeah, that's right. So, you know, you have these Linda Burney and all that going up to remote communities and talking to them. They don't really understand what's going on. But you know what I mean? Like that, because they haven't been open and honest. I really worry about the mental health of my mob because at the moment, you know, let's face it, you know, especially in them remote communities, they don't have good health systems. And, you know, them fellas are going to acquiesce and they will just go, oh yeah, I'll say may as well, oh, you know, look here, there's my bed, they doing it, they saying yes, so yeah, it must be all right. Eh? And that's how they converse about it. They don't really understand. Unless you're educated white for white, if you're only countryman, you don't know, you don't really understand, you know, and it's mucking with their heads. And then
Young people want to come to this.
no, and you know, and also too, this continual melting pot idea and ideology. You know, Torres Strait mob, they've got their culture. They have a beautiful culture. It's their way. Aboriginal people, we have our cultures, and it differs from each nation or clan group, but a lot of similarities.
So at the end of the day,
But so-
all the stuff here,
Yeah.
we're going to end up because, like I said, 50 years ago, I seen this, 50 years on now, I see that. I'm like, so what's going to happen? And I look at the old people saying to me, in another couple of years, because what our way's gone. I respect that. That's what I expect.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, we won't be talking about this another 20 years because if we're going to go by true ways, they've opened up what's left.
Because just honestly, do you think my ancestors, right, and this young Audrey and Lady, your ancestors, right, did they go up when they met each other and say, oh, hello, I'm First Nations, or I'm Aboriginal, or I'm whatever other name that people want to use to be politically correct? No, they didn't.
We just want to be equal. Don't want to be equal. We just want to get the dot like everybody else and say, well, you're not that regional person.
You know, it divides us. It de-identifies us. And I think that is to work within the umbrella of you're all Australians. Like you only have to look at the American First Nations mob. Where are they? They're invisible. That's going to happen here with us eventually, and so that impacts the you know the mental health of our mob. It does. There's a lot of young people that are scared. What's it going to look like?
When it comes to the voice, there are some parts of my life where I have a lot of white people, and a couple of them have actually said to me, how are you going to vote? You just tell me how you're going to vote and I'll vote that way.
Yeah.
So there's this responsibility that I'm starting to feel to inform non-Indigenous friends of mine. And I'm just like, well, you know.
But this is the problem because nobody understands.
Exactly. Yeah.
This is the
I just want to.
some people will vote yes without having the knowledge, you know.
And that is especially for white people, so they don't seem racist.
Exactly. Yeah. So
That is not a
they're
choice.
doing the right thing, but they don't have the knowledge to make decisions.
I just want to go to Shani here. She's being very patient.
She's running over with chocolate, so she I don't want to really get on the list of calling that sort of stuff because to know which way to vote is like, I don't know which way I'm going to vote because there's pros and cons on both because there's not enough information.
Yeah.
There's not enough concrete
Yes.
in writing.
Mm.
So I don't know what I'm right, but anyway. I was going to go back onto the culture side of things that we were talking about and the wording and things like that. And this is just my point of view, like everyone's got different point of views. But I see culture, unfortunately, in some cases, and fortunately in other cases, is ever evolving.
Yes.
We can see how we as people have evolved in our culture, even like, you know, we go out in meetings and go hunting. You know, we don't go rolling out there to go hunting and things like that. There's been trading between Asian countries and Australia for thousands of years, which would have evolved culture in our way of life and how the tools and the methods that we've used for our life. So I think things unfortunately may get lost. Identifying things may get lost in different parts of our cultures because of that evolving. And unfortunately, after colonization as well, it's had a large impact of that evolving that we're not going to be able to stop. I think, of course, there's ways of trying to keep that culture alive, but I think maybe from a large scale point of view, there are going to be things even just like wording. There's a lot of nations that may have existed back a long time ago that don't exist anymore as well.
Yeah.
You know, things that can change that way. I see culture as ever evolving, and that includes even the way things are identified, like the wording of First Nations Australians. Not all of us agree with that wording. I know I've got preferred wording as well. That's not that, but again, going back to that individual, and I think our individual cultures are ever evolving as well.
Yeah. Okay.
What confusion do you feel?
I'm sorry.
I said, when you were saying the friends were asking you what you're going, which way you're heading, at the end of the day, what was in your head? What did you feel?
Of responsibility. I felt a weight of responsibility.
Yeah, and why should you feel that responsibility in that sense? Because a lot of brothers and sisters out there feeling lateral violence because of this thing happening now. So we've got another part of mental health coming through because these people are stressed because people are struggling in the first sense, and now they're going to struggle again because there's a perception out there of this is what it really means. So this to feel this identity is more confronting and confusing than it's ever been before in the last 50, 60 years, because I'm like, well, here we are again.
Yeah.
You know, it's like
so
you're Australian, you Australian us, and the Australian everybody around this table or in this room is saying, well, how does it affect us and blah blah blah. We're going to feel the afterburners of this. You know, that community's going to struggle right across Australia.
Agreed. There's two more learning objectives. So if it's okay with you, I might just move on to the next one. It's in a way a good segue to cultural humility, outline the importance of practicing cultural humility. So this is the definition here, and I found this author, her name's Linda Hunt, and she's written an article, again, we send you a reference list at the end of the handouts. She's from America. She's a professor in the Department of Anthropology at Michigan State University, and she's published some papers around cultural humility. And I think it's an interesting concept. Have you heard of it before? Yes. Okay. Cultural competence is different to cultural humility. And you could think of cultural competence as perhaps the building block of cultural humility. But what I mean is cultural competency plays a really important role in minimising cultural barriers so that those populations that are vulnerable, are underserved and underrepresented have got opportunities to access appropriate healthcare services. So by exploring the traditional cultural concepts and practices of our clients, and by developing models of care that accommodate these cultural nuances, we work together toward the goal, the client's goal, which is to reduce the disproportionate burden of poor health. It's difficult though when the central construct is culture, because the term culture is somewhat elusive, and there are lots of definitions of culture. And to add to that, culture is complex, and like you say, Shani, it's ever changing, it's evolving. So in addition to this, how do you know if you're culturally competent? And there's been lots of discussion about cultural competence. It's not a destination. There's no real way to objectively assess, to someone pointing out what you've done wrong in terms of cultural practice. And you can't predict the beliefs and behaviours of individuals based on where they're from, their nation of origin. There's, like we've said, there's so much diversity amongst those who we consider mob. And sometimes within this group, people are enacting culture in a different way. Like at the beginning with the map of Australia and how I explained that there's so much diversity. Culture is not a set of traits that provide a template for perceptions and behaviours of member groups. That kind of thing can lead to stereotyping. So when it comes to cultural humility, even I need to practice it. We all need to practice it. And Linda Hunt, the author, she summarises it nicely in these 4 points here. Your assumptions and beliefs that are embedded in your understandings and your goals and your encounters with clients. So, for example, do you assume that a client in a relationship that features domestic violence doesn't retaliate? Is that an assumption that you have? Do you have the belief that a client who is experiencing domestic violence is female? Do you have the belief that the victim of domestic violence is better off leaving and living with her family? Is there the possibility you haven't really explored what the client's goals are for their time with you when they're experiencing that? So there are assumptions and beliefs there that's important for us to consider in a position of cultural humility. So number 2, develop a respectful partnership with your client and explore the similarities and differences between your own and your client's priorities and goals and capacities. So in what ways do you try to develop a partnership with your client or patient? Are you comfortable exploring the differences you have to your client in terms of priorities and goals? How do you handle the frustration that sometimes comes about when your client's priorities and goals are different to yours? These are all helping you in a position of cultural humility. Point 3, the onus is yours to develop self-awareness and a respectful attitude toward diverse points of views. That can be a really serious barrier. Here's an example. It's for real. Let's say a non-Indigenous man sexually abused his granddaughter. He's in jail. His wife goes to jail and visits him and believes that's her position as a wife, and that has come at a cost because her 3 children don't talk to her because she does that. And perhaps she's come to you because she's having trouble with the consequence of her decision to continue to support her husband while he's in jail. So that would require developing a self-awareness as a practitioner. And how would you go respecting an attitude that may be very different from yours in that way? Sorry?
Who's black and that's not.
Yeah.
I suggest she needs to get back and get some college education
Mm.
and use have sexual connections and anybody other than their first wife that's illegal. second one, third one, they're not there for that. And anybody that says it's a cultural fight, it's lying.
Number 4, explore cultural differences, the relationship between your perspective and your client's perspective in terms of basic assumptions, expectations and goals. That's what you're talking about.
Yeah, I think you have to be brave to fight in the white collar way, especially if you're paid a white collar salary. As somebody that's climbing ranks in white collar way, I'm at a director level now. But I'll give you an example of spending that white power that I've been granted and have earned. There's been times where I've supervised. Sorry, I didn't mean to disrespect you. So I'll give you an example of suspect like flippiness. I got a forensic specialty at master's level in forensic science, and which means I deliberately chose that vocation because it puts me in prisons to serve men primarily with a profile, Aboriginal men that is. So when I'm working in the forensic space, often my staff, a white fella organisational position, Aboriginal men, they want to serve their mates, they want to serve their brothers. So that means that I'm a bare-skinned 50-year-old woman supervising Aboriginal men that have cultural authority over me. So I have to flip that and say, I might be your superior on a white fella org chart, and I'm going to growl at you if you don't do your case notes. I need you to put in your timesheet because that's what we do. But I have to develop a sense of inferiority and take guidance from them. So I need to define how we communicate in public. How they want me to talk to them about whether their case notes are late, and if I would do so privately or in a team meeting. So it's literally the activation of the duality in play.
Thanks for that example. It's a good one. And what you're saying is that everything that's shared between you and them is steeped in culture, and then you've got the system, which is based on a different worldview.
Correct.
As well.
Yeah. Sometimes at my cost.
Yes. So you've got different worldviews coming together.
When I serve my elders and their personal slave, even if it means taking one for the team.
So it requires openness and flexibility, and that's what you're talking about in your relationships with them.
I'm lucky because I'm articulate. My elders utilize me like I said as a tool to advocate for their needs, whether they're on a white walk chart or they just see me on the street and ask me to do stuff wrong.
What I'm saying is, when you said that, whose country are you on? So are you connected to that
No.
in a way? So what are their typical obvious that have you presented?
Sure.
On not my audio side, my people on my turn, so we respect women.
Right,
Women, we got the women on here. On the old side, my dad's side, man hunts way. So I'm maternal on one side, maternal on the other side. When I go to some of these countries, I find out which part that is. That's my understanding of how I treat that community. So I won't take that step back, it's set on my country. I don't do that with somebody else's country.
Yeah.
This is my country, so
Yeah.
nobody comes to my country and insults me in our ways. That's our ways. So I don't talk about culture, because that's not that part. When you said that, your cultural component is yours.
Yeah.
So once you start letting that go, you let that power go to them.
Yeah, I understand.
You know what I'm saying?
I do.
So you can hold your street. That's your
Yeah.
culture.
I know, it's such a delicate
Yeah,
balance.
so, but that's the thing, so you want to play this game in Western society, but you're also playing the game of this tribe, that tribe, this tribe. And that's why I say, when they ask me, I said, no, you're the So this is my boundary, I'm saying this out way.
Yeah.
So, no disrespect there. I've still got to hold my power.
Yeah, I understand.
See what I'm saying?
I do, I
So when
do.
we get to the island ways,
Yeah,
that's what I said, when we go this way, it's the same scenario. I still got to talk that way, but with the island people, we hold that complaint, we don't keep that away. That's popular,
yeah,
can't keep the power.
yeah.
That's, we don't talk culture, this is how we live it. We don't got that down.
And I think the important point here is that everybody brings their own perspective
Yeah.
and their own knowledge, every interaction. And you have that with clients as well, so colleagues.
Yeah,
and
because
clients.
we have that when they come to this kind of thing. That
Yeah,
Because I talk from on this land, doesn't mean.
yeah.
You know, I can't talk to my culture. It's me.
Mm,
That means they still can't take it off either.
mm,
That's where our young people get confused because they, I give you this, I give you that, I give you this, I give you that. Yeah.
Oh, I completely understand. I was really lucky to have a mixed mob. By that, I mean, I had Wildfree mob, Larrakia mob, Narrandera, Naranga, Bukaba, and Yamatha, which is most of the Indian Nation groups in South Australia. And because I understand that not all those mobs are homogenous and they're not all the same,
mm,
I had very tailored responses based on the person in front of me.
yes. And it's a process of self-reflection and also self-critique.
Yeah, and there were times just to change the energy. There were times when it was really funny. You know, so I'll give you an example of the light and the energy in the room. I went to the Flinders University open day with unit, and it was full of university, which sounds really culturally great. Apparently the mob had done some consultation, you know, so they had their fancy banners and their lanyards, you know, all the big packs that you get, all that shit. And I went to it and come back to the office. I thought I was deadly having a little cup of tea out of a fresh cup of tea and all that. And my sister, which is more Peter Pan, so I think Flinders Rangers, Port Augusta, big media, and then she started busting out laughing. I was like, what for then, Kerry? And she reckons in her language, Yong Marindi means smelly crack.
Oh, don't.
Don't have that.
Thanks for that laugh. So that's cultural humility. It's a lifelong practice and it's about reflection and also critique of yourself and understanding what you're bringing to the interaction and honing those skills and acquiring the knowledge. So there's one more learning objective to cover in 3 minutes. Implementing practical considerations to increase the practice incentive programs. Is there anyone who requires that we go over this one? Are you practicing in a way that requires you to increase your practice incentive program? No. Well, essentially what it's about, this fourth learning objective, it's about improving the health outcomes for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and encouraging practice to prevent, identify and manage chronic disease. So does that apply to you as a nurse? Yeah. Okay. So what are some practical considerations that you can commit to that you can implement to improve Indigenous health outcomes in your practice? So I just want to quickly share with you some meaningful experiences that I've had that might spark some ideas for you. So you can apply some of these at your workplace or discuss them with your employer. As a teenager, I gained some really important foundational workplace skills as a trainee in the public service. and it held me in good stead for a number of years through gainful employment, the development of widely applicable practical skills that I've learnt, and it introduced me to a work and a cultural network that I still draw from today. So perhaps a trainee program perhaps an administrative one might be an option for your practice. When I engage with any service in any capacity, whether I'm a client or whether I'm a psychologist, nothing makes as much of an impact on me as my first point of contact being with another Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander person. There's a peace and there's a comfort that comes with knowing that there's a shared understanding that permits me to relax in my engagement with that service. So the first point of contact is really so important. And here's another example. When I was working for a private practice out at Capella Bar in Brisbane, they had this statement on the reception. And I wonder what your professional practice statement might be. I might also say that always, every time the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander flags always get my attention. As an undergraduate in my third year at uni, I had the opportunity to participate in a traineeship, cadetship program in the research centre that I worked at. It was a really amazing opportunity, and I continue to maintain those relationships today. So perhaps your organisation has got the capacity to introduce a cadetship program, or perhaps even an Indigenous graduate program. Because if it wasn't for those opportunities that I'd had, I certainly wouldn't be in front of you here today. So what I'd encourage you to do is to think about how you can make a commitment, how you can show your commitment, and how you can practice your commitment to improving Indigenous health outcomes within your practice. And put it on display, show your commitment. Are there any examples that you can think of that you've seen around of practices that do this sort of thing? Yeah.
So part of my role is to go to private practices and assist them with not only understanding our integrated team care program, but also to see if they're culturally safe. The first thing I look for is if there's any kind of flags or anything like you've said, also an acknowledgement flag. Do they even know who their traditional owners are of the land that they're practicing on? And I also like to encourage them to put especially the Indigenous health incentive payments that they get back into Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander patients. So are they utilising those incentive payments to assist with bulk billing or to assist with more promotion or understanding? Can they utilise even those funds to employ an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health worker or practitioner, and not only use those employees, those positions for Indigenous patients, but utilise them for the qualifications that they have for anyone who walks through the door as well. It's a valued and unique position, and to utilise that as a specialist service. So they can do almost everything as a nurse, but they specialise in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health.
Thank you.